The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses flew off, shattering into hopeless shards of crystal across the opulent ballroom floor, while 130 guests froze in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the ache in my chest cut deeper. It was Sloane, my daughter-in-law, who had slapped me on her wedding day simply because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. "This is the price for your selfishness," she screamed in my face before everyone. "A woman your age doesn't need that much space." The silence that followed turned deafening, leaden. I trembled, knelt to gather the broken glass, and not a single hand reached out to help me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I cupped the cracked lens like a small wounded bird and felt the room tilt, just slightly, as if the chandeliers had leaned in to listen. Someone's laughter stalled mid-breath. Somewhere, a phone camera clicked and kept clicking. I rose slowly, palms glittered with tiny splinters of my own sight, and took in the faces I had fed, greeted, and helped seat an hour earlier. No one moved. Even my son, Tyler, kept his gaze fastened to the gleam of his new shoes. There was a time he had scuffed those shoes running toward me when he tripped on cracked sidewalks. Now he stood still and let me fall alone. I smoothed the skirt of my thrift store dress, the one I chose because the pockets were deep and the fabric didn't ask for permission. My handbag felt heavier than it was. In it sat a small hardbound notebook with dates and times and things I had heard but wasn't meant to. In it sat my spare set of keys on a blue tag that said home. I could hear Sloane's voice bouncing off the gilded molding, older, alone, too much space, like a scripture she wanted everyone to memorize. I did not answer her. I did not plead. I gathered what was left of my glasses and my breath and I walked, past the cake I had chosen and quietly paid for, past the florist peonies I had arranged at a discount because old loyalties are real even when family isn't, past the table place cards I had hand-lettered in the late hours when Tyler still told me small things about his day. The vestibule was cooler, all marble and a faint smell of lemon polish. The doorman watched me the way one watches an argument through a window, present and powerless. I pushed through the revolving door and met the city's damp evening. Streetlights had just clicked on. A line of rideshare cars idled, amber signals winking like patient fireflies. I set the broken frames in my bag, took out my phone, and pressed a number I hadn't needed in a year. "Marianne?" Nathan's voice came warm, then alert in a heartbeat. "Are you all right?" "I will be," I said. "Come to Riverbend Hall. Bring the brown folder, the one we labeled for emergencies we never want." There was a clean moment of silence on his end, the kind of silence people give when they understand the shape of something without touching it. "On my way," he said. 25 minutes. I ended the call and looked at my reflection in the brass door, soft gray hair swept back, a cheek flushed with the outline of a hand I hadn't earned. My breath plumed once, twice. I slipped the phone into my pocket and dialed again. "Ruth? It's me." Her voice, that gentle librarian's cadence I'd come to trust, landed like a hand on a shoulder. "What do you need?" The brown folder's second copy is in my desk, right drawer, under the envelopes. "Can you bring it to me? And Ruth, could you make sure the camera in the hall is still pointed where we left it? The one that sees my front door." "I'm on it," she said. "No questions. Loyalty can be that simple." A gust lifted the ends of my hair, and with it came the ballroom's muffled music pushing through walls designed to keep people like me at the edges. The door opened behind me, then closed. Perfume drifted past, and a pair of bridesmaids scurried inside, eyes wide, whispers quick. I leaned back against the stone and let the cool seep through my dress to my spine. The ache in my chest had changed. It wasn't pain now. Not exactly. More like alignment. As if a drawer, long stuck, had finally slid into its track. I had chosen a simple life. People mistake that for poverty. I worked 2 mornings a week at a church pantry because the rhythm of sorting cans and greeting names steadies the hands. I drove a 10-year-old sedan because it started every time. My late husband taught me that visible wealth invites other people's plans. Invisible wealth lets you keep your own. I listened. Sloane never did. The first time she stepped into my apartment, she called it charming, in a tone that meant the opposite, and looked past my quilts and books to the view, river, sky, bridges like quiet animals. Later, when she thought I wasn't listening, she told her mother, "It's wasted on her," At her age, stairs are a liability. We could make so much more of it. She said it like a prayer, practiced until it sounded true. I had written the date. I had written the time. I had written the exact words. A taxi door thumped. The driver leaned on his horn in a long, patient sigh. Somewhere toward the river, a siren stitched the blocks together. I closed my eyes and rewound the last months. The brochures for independent living smoothed onto my coffee table with the edge of a manicured hand. Tyler's voice, careful and borrowed, asking if I had thought about right-sizing, the man with the laser measure on the sidewalk pretending to wait for a friend. I had smiled at him and asked, "How many feet from manipulation to theft, would you say?" He didn't answer. People rarely do when you call a thing by its name. I opened my eyes to the street again. The valet flicked ashes into a tiny silver tray and pretended not to watch me. I checked the time. 17 minutes. I wasn't afraid. I was steady. Tired. But not the kind of tired that sends you to bed. The kind of tired that sends you to the desk to make lists. I had already made them. The brown folder held proof of what I had been quietly doing for 34 months, because love can be clumsy. Small transfers to keep a sinking budget from drowning. A guarantee on a lease I never mentioned. A deposit for a celebration I suspected would be used as a weapon. I had kept my son afloat, hoping the current would teach him something kinder. Turns out currents teach only those who want to learn. The vestibule door sicked open again. A young waiter stepped out with a trash bag, startled to see me, then forced a smile. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need—" "I'm fine," I said. And I was. "Thank you." He nodded, unsure, and hurried to the bins. I watched the bag drop and bounce. We throw away a lot of things we could repair if we had patience. Glass, for instance. Even broken, it remembers what it was and what light can do with it. Headlights curled into the drive. Not Nathan yet. A couple in evening clothes stepped from a sedan. They brushed past, warm with drink and easy certainty. The woman looked at me as if I were a painting hung slightly crooked. I let her. My phone buzzed. A text from Ruth. "On my way. The camera is green. The folder is in my bag. Do you want me to call Dana?" "Yes," I typed. "Tell her to pull public filings, liens, anything with my address on it. The listing agreement they tried to slide under my handwriting. I want to see if it already exists somewhere it shouldn't." "Copy," Ruth wrote. Then a heart. It's funny, the shapes we hold each other in. Some are made of blood, some are made of showing up. Another set of headlights. This time I recognized the car. Nathan stepped out, coat already unbuttoned, a messenger bag looped across his chest. He saw my cheek, didn't touch it, and I loved him a little for that restraint. "Before we go in," he said softly, "you should know, if we do this, the room will change." "It already has," I said. "We're just going to let it admit it." He handed me the brown folder, heavy, familiar. He had labeled the spine in his tidy hand. Documentation. Inside were the pages I needed, and the ones I didn't know I'd need until tonight. Suspension notice. A rescission drafted months ago, in case. A list of accounts in my name, and the line items that had, over time, been recategorized from love to enablement. "Marianne," he said, "are you sure?" I looked through the glass at the ballroom. I could see the cake, tiered and stiff with icing. I could see Tyler's profile bent toward Sloane's white shoulder. I could see my life's softness gathered up and used as napkins. "I am," I said. The words felt like closing a drawer. Clean, final without rage. We stepped back toward the door. The doorman straightened. The music faltered for a second, then held. My heart kept easy time. I wasn't going to make a scene, I was going to make a record. 14 minutes left. Enough to find the manager, enough to ask for the contract by number, enough to return to the center of the room and speak what was already true. I pushed the door, and the night air gave me one last cool breath on the skin of my hot cheek. Then I stepped in, and the marble accepted my steps as if I had always belonged to this floor. I did not leave the ballroom to disappear. I left to remember who I am when no one is watching. My name is Marianne Cole. I am 62. For 35 years I audited hospital ledgers until every digit felt like a bead you could count in the dark. Bills terrify people. I learned to read them for what they are, a record, a story in numbers. Every charge tells you who touched a body, what time a decision was made, and which signature allowed it. In the quiet aftershifts, I would run my finger down columns and listen for the one line that did not belong. That habit never left me. It is how I survived grief. It is how I recognized greed when it put on a white dress. We lived simply on purpose. My late husband used to say privacy is a door you keep shut so the wind has to knock before it comes in. We bought second-hand couches and a good mattress. We put money where it could do work without drawing a crowd. The church pantry knew my name long before any bank manager did. I like things that can be counted without being flaunted. Rows of canned beans are a better sermon than any speech about generosity. They go where they are needed, and they do not brag. The apartment they wanted is not fancy. It is light. In the mornings, the river throws silver on the ceiling, and the bridges look like patient beasts at rest. When Tyler was little, he would fall asleep by the window to the sound of boat horns and wake up full of stories. I sometimes think that is where I lost him, not in one day or one choice, but in a long, slow trade from story to status. He began to want what made a picture instead of what made a life. Sloane learned that language young and spoke it fluently. The first time she crossed my threshold, she did not take off her shoes. She told me how lovely and vintage everything felt, then pinched the corner of a quilt, like a buyer at a yard sale. She asked what my homeowners association fee was and whether the elevator ever broke. She complimented the view and then asked about the square footage as if the river could be measured in inches. When she went to the bathroom, I stood by the sink and heard her whisper in the hall, "It is wasted on her." At her age, stairs are a liability. I wrote the words later with the exact phrasing. Habit, ledger mind. You keep a record, not because you plan to weaponize it, but because you respect the truth enough to preserve it. That is why there is a key taped under my desk, where even I sometimes forget it lives. That is why the little safe deposit key sits in a recipe tin labeled nutmeg. That is why the brown folder exists at all. It began as a joke between Nathan and me. He is a fiduciary who talks like a teacher and writes like a clerk. After Robert died, I gave him the balance sheets that frightened me. He gave me categories that calmed me. One day, over lukewarm coffee, he slid a new folder across the table and asked me to label it, "For emergencies we never want." I laughed then and put it on a shelf and dusted it twice a year. When Sloane started leaving glossy brochures on my coffee table with words like community and safety, I took the folder down. When a stranger stood on the curb outside with a laser measurer while Tyler pretended to be on his phone, I took the folder down. When Tyler practiced saying appropriate for your age and could not meet my eyes, I took the folder down. There is a difference between aging and being erased. The first is honest, the second is theft in a cardigan. I know the scripture for this kind of theft. It begins with concern. A woman your age. It continues with math that seems gentle. You could sell and have years of care. It ends with signatures that remove your name from your own door. I did not want to see that story act itself out with my face in it. So, I turned back to the tools I trust. Paper, dates, names, clauses, who benefits. I called Dana Kim, who has eyes that miss nothing and the patience of a gardener. She learned my walls by their squeaks when she helped me install bookcases after Robert left. She knows the neighborhood, the way the river fog sits, the way an appraiser moves when he is pretending not to be one. Could you check public filings? I asked. Liens, eviction notices, anything with my address. Could you run the names Sloane Mercer and Tyler Cole through your smallest sieve and see what remains? She did not ask why. She knew the why. She heard it the day Sloane admired the light and then calculated it. The reports came back like lab results you expect but dread. Revolving credit stacked like a precarious chair. A wedding planned on optimism and borrowed time. 3 months behind on rent. A cash advance patched with another cash advance. In a separate section, a different kind of math, Tyler had called 2 attorneys to ask about springing powers for an aging parent. Sloane had searched guardianship in the county where we live, and then bookmarked a page titled Capacity Concerns. They called it planning. I call it a rehearsal for taking. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder open and thought about the first time I taught Tyler how to read a bill. He was 10 and wanted a bike with blue stripes. I laid the electric bill down and showed him how the numbers climbed when the air conditioner ran too long. You do not have to be afraid of this, I told him. Money is not mystery, it is a record of your choice. He listened then. He held the paper at the edge like a precious thing. Somewhere along the way that reverence turned to something else. He learned to look away from statements and toward photo backdrops. I would give almost anything to take him walking along the river at dusk and teach him again. Almost anything. Not the deed to my life. People ask why I never told him the scale of what his father built and of what I have guarded since. Because secrets rot families, and money is a secret that spoils quickest. Because I wanted him to build a spine before he ever held a windfall. Because happiness that depends on inheritance is not happiness but delay. And because I believed love could keep us honest without accounting. I was wrong in part. Love needs ledgers too, not for punishment, for clarity. When Sloane began to call my thrift selfishness, I heard what she meant. Give me what you have. Translate your life into my plans. The flowered dresses, the old sedan, the pantry shifts, all of it read to her as withholding. To me it read as freedom. There is a power in knowing you can walk into a room with nothing obvious and still own your choices wall to wall. I had forgotten how radical that can look to someone performing abundance on borrowed credit. On the afternoon before the wedding, I boiled eggs and packed them neatly in the refrigerator because returning home to small order calms me. I set my ledger notebook beside the phone. I checked the camera in the hall, the one Ruth had helped me adjust, to be sure it caught my door and the length of carpet in both directions. Precautions feel paranoid until the moment they are simply prudent. After the slap, after the silence, after the hotel air tasted like lemon and dust, I stood under the awning and watched rain bead on my hands. They are good hands, work-worn. They have folded 1,000 paper statements and tied 1,000 pantry bags and held a boy's forehead when fever made him wild. I looked at the faint constellation of tiny glass bites in my palms and thought, even light can cut if it falls wrong. I put the broken frames in my bag. I put the phone back in my pocket. I stood still. The city made its usual sounds. Tires and water, distant siren, a laugh through a door. The doorman shifted and pretended not to look. I do not blame him. People who watch for a living learn when not to witness. I checked the time. Nathan would be here in minutes. Ruth would text when she was near. Dana would pull anything the county had already touched. I breathed. I let my shoulders drop. I listened to the rhythm of my own quiet. It reminded me of counting heartbeats in a waiting room when you need to know something that will not be known for an hour. I told myself what I used to tell patients who brought me their terrors in the shape of invoices. We are going to read this together. We are going to match the charges to the care. We are going to find what does not belong and we are going to dispute it. We are going to keep what is ours. A black sedan turned the corner. Nathan's car. The door opened. He stepped out carrying the folder like a small box of weather. Another door in my mind shut gently. I felt taller by an inch. Not because I had won anything yet, but because I had remembered the rule that runs under all my days. Do not argue with a story someone tells about you. Bring the record, read it out loud. Then offer them the grace to change their own name on the page. Inside the hall, I could hear music cresting, then fading. The song ended. Applause rose and fell like a weak tide. It sounded like a room that did not know what it had just done. Nathan reached me. He looked at my cheek and looked away. Good. We would not make this about bruises. We would make it about documents. He offered me the folder. I took it. It was heavier than it had been this morning. Not by ounces, by meaning. We stood a moment under the awning, two silhouettes reflected in wet stone. He said nothing. I said nothing. Then I nodded and we walked toward the door. I learned the shape of pressure by how softly it arrives. It does not knock. It lets itself in with a casserole and a brochure. Sloane started with compliments that left fingerprints. She brought a candle that smelled like cotton and said my apartment was darling. She tapped a picture frame with one manicured nail and said my quilting was definitely in. She stood by the window and used her phone like a mirror, then tilted the camera to catch the river behind her and smiled as if the view belonged to her already. I poured coffee and watched her take everything in without touching a thing, the way buyers do when they have already decided. Tyler arrived 10 minutes later with a grin I recognized from middle school, the one he wore when he needed me to say yes before I heard the ask. He kissed my cheek, looked around as if he had not grown up here, and said the light is amazing. I said it has been amazing since you were 6 and used to count boats. He laughed like it was new, and I let him. On the second visit, Sloane set a stack of glossy folders on my coffee table and treated them like menus. She fanned them out so the words faced me. Independent living, resort-style amenities, no maintenance headaches. The pages shone. Smiling couples strolled on paths that did not exist in my neighborhood. I ran a finger along the smooth paper and felt the sales pitch try to slip under my skin. "This is only research," she said, friendly, not pushing. Her voice warmed to the exact degree of concern that sells. "At a certain stage of life, you deserve support. Imagine waking up and knowing everything is handled." I looked at Tyler. He had that patient, coached expression men get when they are trying to be the bridge between a woman they love and the mother they came from. He lifted his hands, palms out, as if to say no pressure, just options. I slid one brochure back toward her with a small smile. "I was born in a house where floorboards complained," I said. "If something is not a little broken, I do not trust it." She laughed in a way that folded me into a category. Charming. Stubborn. The kind of woman who would be grateful later if you just made the hard decision for her. Later that week, as I measured flour to bake a sour cream cake, I heard voices in the hall just outside my door. Sloane spoke low into her phone. "The view is ridiculous, Mom, and the building is solid. If I can get her to see this is too much space for her to manage, we could be in by summer while we look for something even better. Tyler is almost there. He wants what is best." She paused and then said, "No, I am not worried. She is sweet. She will want to help." I set the metal measuring cup on the counter and wrote her words exactly as she said them. Sweet. Help. Too much space. In my notebook, I underlined each phrase and closed the page. From then on, she rehearsed the kindness that makes a prison. She arrived with soup on rainy days and placed it in my freezer with labels written in a careful hand. She sent me links about preventing falls. She asked which medications I took and whether my doctor had mentioned anything about calcium. She straightened picture frames and mended nothing. She touched nothing that could not be displayed. Tyler began to borrow her language, as if his mouth needed a script to say the things he did not quite believe. "Mom, have you thought about right-sizing?" "Mom, stairs are not friendly forever." "Mom, it would be nice to be closer to people in your season of life." The words season and appropriate slid across the table like coasters. He would not look at me long when he said them. He looked at the brochures instead, at the neat lists that promised to take work from our days and hand it to strangers. I started labeling my own days. I made small notations on the calendar next to the phone. Sloane leaves brochure number 3. Tyler says right-sizing. Saturday, 3 o'clock. Balcony, wind from south. I am not suspicious by nature. I am disciplined by training. When numbers tremble, you steady your hand and write them down. Then the man with the laser showed up. I was returning from the pantry with a bag of dented cans when I saw him on the sidewalk, a neat polo, a tidy beard, a device that shot red lines across brick. He pretended to study a street sign when I came near. I set my bag down on the stoop and watched the little red dot travel across my building as if it had some right to measure me. "Are you waiting for someone?" I asked. He said nothing for a beat too long and then said, "For a friend." His eyes climbed to my windows and then back to the device in his hand. He had the awkward courtesy of a person caught trespassing in thought. I smiled. "How many feet from care to control would you say, if you were measuring that today?" He blinked, pocketed the laser, and left. I wrote the time beside the note about the wind. I called Dana. She arrived that evening with a tote bag and her own binder. She has the precise energy of a woman who reads square footage without needing to look at her notes. "Sit," she said. "Tell me everything." I did. She listened like a banker and like a friend. When I finished, she tapped her pen against her notebook twice and said, "I will pull public filings first thing. If anything has been listed with your address, we will know." If an appraiser drew an outside sketch, he left breadcrumbs. A week later, she came back with copies. Sloane had visited an elder law website. Tyler had made 2 brief calls to offices that handle capacity evaluations. There was no listing in the system yet. But there was a template document in Sloane's drafts for a budget labeled New Start that included rent reduction line items that looked very much like my mortgage payment. Dana placed each page on the table like a card in a game where the trick is telling the truth slowly so the room has to feel it. That night I could not sleep. Not because of fear, Because I had seen the shape of the plan and it was familiar. In the hospital, we used to watch for quiet errors, a double-billed test, a drug coded wrong. They were not crimes until someone decided to keep them that way. If you returned them to light, they were just mistakes you could fix. Sloane was not making a mistake. She was building a narrative. Concerned young couple rescues aging mother from burden. I knew how the story would end if I surrendered the pen, with my signature under someone else's plan. The day after the appraiser, I was carrying out recycling when I saw Sloane on my block again, laughing with a woman at the corner. The woman pointed up to my floor. Sloane nodded. Then she saw me. She smiled and waved both hands and said loudly how beautiful the azaleas were this time of year. I looked at the woman beside her. Her eyes were the appraising kind. She held a clipboard and wore flats suitable for climbing stairs. That evening, Tyler called. He wanted to talk about logistics for the wedding. He also wanted to revisit the question of the apartment. He said it softly, as if lifting something fragile. "Mom, we just want you safe." He said safe the way people do when they are about to lock a door you did not ask to have locked. I answered him the way I answer invoices, with clarity. I am safe in my home. I have lived here long enough to know which floorboards complain and which steps need respect. I am not a hazard. I am a person with a mortgage and a memory. There was a pause. He exhaled and said he loved me. I said I loved him. We both meant it. Love sat down between us like a tired relative and refused to choose a side. 2 days later, I found a new brochure on my doormat. It had been slid there without a knock. The cover showed a woman my age laughing at a table with 3 friends who did not have names. The tagline promised community and dignity. I picked it up and felt the weight of the cardstock. Thick, expensive. I opened it. On page 5, a small inset box outlined a concierge service that would handle transitions with compassion. I read the bullet points: downsizing, estate sales, power of attorney consultations available. The brochure smiled as it explained how easily I could disappear from my own decisions. I placed it in my folder and wrote the date. Then I made tea. I sat by the window and watched the river turn pink as the sun folded itself into the west. Boats moved like punctuation on the water. The bridges kept their patient shapes. In the reflection, I could see my face, the cheekbone that would be read 3 weeks later under ballroom lights, the mouth that would speak in a calm voice and sound like paper being turned. When I finished my tea, I stood and walked to my desk. I opened the right-hand drawer and felt for the blue tape under the lip. My fingers touched the cool oval of the spare key I keep there. I did not remove it. I only touched it to remind myself how the metal feels. I slid my hand deeper and found the corner of the brown folder. I took it out and set it on the desk. I opened it and read the first page. Documentation. The word steadied me. I listened to the house breathe. The refrigerator hummed. A bus sighed to a stop at the corner. Somewhere in the hallway, a shoe scuffed, and a neighbor whispered goodnight into a phone. I turned a page, then another. I let the papers make their quiet sounds. I imagined the printer at Nathan's office warming up, the motor high, then steady, as it would on the night I asked him to bring everything we had prepared for situations we had hoped would never come. The thought did not frighten me. It organized me. I closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer. I turned off the lamp. In the window, the river kept moving forward, a dark ribbon carrying lights from one hour to the next. Due diligence is a kind of prayer where you lay the facts out in order and wait for their meaning to arrive. The morning after the brochures and the man with the laser, I set the kettle to boil and opened my notebook. Dates and phrases lined up like beads needing a thread. I wrote down what I could swear to without raising my voice. Sloane's sentences, the measured wink of the appraiser, the exact time Tyler first said the words right-sizing. I am not suspicious. I am trained. In the hospital, when a number trembled, I did not accuse a human being. I checked 2 sources, then 3, and only then did I speak. I called Dana first. She answered on the second ring, the sound of keyboard keys already under her words. "Tell me what you have and what you need," she said. I told her I needed sunlight, public filings. Any whisper of my address living outside my control. She hummed once, the note she makes when gears engage, and said she would sift the county's records by lunchtime, the state's by dusk. Next, I called Nathan. He keeps records like a monastery keeps bread. Not grand, just constant. I told him about the brochures, the appraiser, the hallway phone call. He did not gasp. He asked for timelines. I gave him days and hours. He listened, then said, "If you are willing, forward me the last 3 years of outgoing transfers you made to Tyler's accounts and any payments where you served as guarantor. We are not judging. We are matching your memory to paper before anyone else rewrites it." I sat at my kitchen table and pulled the statements. My hands knew the rhythm without thinking. Filter, export, save, print. On the page, the choices I had called kindness formed a pattern I could not ignore. Small monthly amounts that became not small at all when they were counted together, payments to a landlord I had never met, auto insurance lines I did not drive under, a venue deposit made in cash at my request so Tyler could have his evening without debt for once. I had told myself that temporary scaffolding keeps a young life from collapsing. The problem with scaffolding is that if you leave it up long enough, people forget the building can stand on its own. I labeled each transfer with a color pencil: green for mercy, yellow for habit, red for indulgence. The red surprised me. Somewhere along the way, my generosity had started covering costs that taught nothing. Sloane's stylist consultation before a job interview, a series of spendy dinners that never made it onto their budget. I had been paying to keep the story pleasant. The invoices did not say thank you. Paper rarely does. It only tells you what you did. By noon, Dana sent me her first packet in an email titled "Open when ready." I breathed once, clicked, and the pages unfurled. There was no listing filed on my address, not yet. She had confirmed the appraiser was from a firm that often worked with Sloane's mother. There were screenshots of a spreadsheet labeled New Start with a line item called Rent Relief that matched my mortgage within a handful of dollars. There were 2 emails from Sloane to a friend asking for referrals to estate service companies for a hypothetical mother who needed a dignified transition. Hypothetical is a generous word for plans you intend to carry out as soon as the ink is dry. Dana had also pulled court dockets. Tyler's name appeared in the public record for a late rent notice that had been settled. Sloane had 3 credit lines near their caps and had taken an advance in the month she posted travel photos from a beach I could not name. Dana's note beside each entry was spare. Not judgment, context. "See page 5, she wrote beneath the late notice. "See interest rate," she wrote under the cash advance. "See timing," she wrote beside the beach post. I felt 2 things at once: sorrow for how far from shore my son had drifted, and relief that I had something solid to hold when the waves of explanation came. Facts are not a weapon, they are a handrail. In the afternoon, Nathan called. His voice was the same tone he used the night we set up my first bond ladder, the tone that makes decisions feel like putting soup into labeled jars. "Marianne," he said, "I have reconciled your outgoing transfers with the accounts you forwarded. Over the last 34 months, you have sent regular support in amounts that average to a sum large enough to distort any young budget. You also guaranteed a lease for a unit you do not live in. You covered a venue deposit and 2 vendor holdbacks. None of this is a sin, but it means your name appears in places where people might mistake your help for consent." He paused, letting that line sit where it needed to. I closed my eyes and saw the word consent on a white page, then my name in a tidy font beside responsibilities I had never intended to cede. I asked him to continue. He said he would draft a notice of suspension for the recurring transfers and prepare a rescission for any guarantees that allowed it. He said he would lay out the mechanics so that if I chose to use them, we could act cleanly and within our rights. He did not press. He does not press. He gives you doors and shows you the hinges. In the late afternoon, Ruth stopped by with a thermos of soup and her own small contributions. She had printed emails from the Tenants Association mailing list where Sloane had asked crowdwise about the best seasons to list units with river views. She had a note from the super who mentioned an unfamiliar woman asking about key fob replacement policies. Ruth's voice stayed gentle even when her eyes were flint. "We will bring what is ours, and we will let them bring what they think is theirs," she said. "The truth will breathe if we let it." Before sunset, I sat with my calendar and made a clean log. I wrote everything as if a stranger would need to read it. No adjectives, just nouns and times. Sloane becomes a pronoun, becomes a line on a page. It is a mercy to separate a person from their behavior, even as you protect yourself from both. The phone rang just as the light turned the river pewter. Dana again. She had found something else. She spoke carefully. "Marianne, there is no guardianship petition filed. But I can see that Tyler placed 2 initial inquiry calls to firms that handle capacity evaluations. Each call lasted under 3 minutes. He was gathering preliminary information. There is also a browser history cache from a public library terminal near their apartment with searches about elder decision-making and springing authority. I cannot tie it to a single person. I can only tell you these searches happened after your last refusal to move." The words did not surprise me. They settled in the places I had already cleared for them. Tyler had always researched before tests. He had always looked for shortcuts when he felt cornered. A boy who did not cheat, but sometimes copied the chapter questions from a friend because the clock frightened him. A man who did not want to hurt his mother, but did not want to disappoint his wife. I lifted my pen and wrote the time of the calls. I stood and made tea. The kettle sighed and clicked. I took out the small box where I keep the flash drive labeled household scans. I added copies of the day's findings. I printed hard copies too because paper is a kind of anchor. I slipped them into the brown folder and ran a finger along the tab. Documentation. The word felt like a hand at the small of my back, steadying me toward the door I would eventually have to walk through. In the evening, the apartment hummed the way a place does when you have asked it to hold your breath for you. I put the statements back in their drawer. I returned the flash drive to its tin. I washed my cup and left it to dry mouth down on a towel. I stood by the window and watched a barred shoulder pass the pier with a patience I envied. My phone buzzed with a message from Nathan. "Drafts ready when you are. No urgency. Your choice." Beneath it, a message from Dana. "No listing yet. I will set an alert. Sleep if you can." Then Ruth, a simpler text. "I am here." The house answered me with the small sounds of trust. A pipe clicked. The radiator sighed. In the hallway, someone's child laughed, and then was shushed. I turned off the lamp and let the room get honest with the dark. I knew now what I would do if the performance went public. I would not accuse. I would not shout. I would bring the record and read it aloud. And when people asked me why I did not warn them, I would say I did. I warned them by telling the truth to a page. Before bed, I cued the printer with one last set of pages so I would not change my mind in the morning. I pressed print and listened as the machine warmed, the motor rising, catching, settling into its work. The first sheet slid forward and landed in the tray. I let it sit there untouched, face down, while the room held its breath with me. They called it a family meeting, as if kindness had a calendar. Sloan texted the time and Tyler added a heart, then a second text that said, "Please hear us out." I set out 4 cups and a small plate of butter cookies. The river sent late light across the ceiling, the kind that makes dust look like snow you can breathe. I opened the window an inch. Fresh air helps when people plan to use words as furniture. They arrived at 3 on the dot. Sloan in a cream blouse meant to look effortless. Tyler with a nervous smile and tulips he handed to me like an apology he had bought. Behind them came her parents, the Mercers, coats folded over their arms, faces arranged into an expression I know by name. Civic concern. They shook my hand with the grip of people about to slide papers across a table. Mrs. Mercer began before anyone Saturday. "We love this apartment, Marianne. It is so you. But at a certain stage of life, support is a gift." She took a glossy folder from her tote and placed it on the coffee table. Mr. Mercer followed with a manila envelope and the careful air of someone who runs numbers for sport. Tyler lingered near the window, as if he could hide in the view he had once loved. Sloan perched on the edge of the sofa and put her phone face down on her knee like a trained bird. I poured tea. Stirring sugar is a way to breathe. The spoon tapped the cup twice, small bells in a room about to become a courtroom. "We have done a little research," Mrs. Mercer said, and produced a stapled document with a cheerful cover. A care plan, she called it, the words underlined in blue. It listed a budget on the second page, tidy and reassuring. Community fee, monthly services, transportation, prepared meals. The numbers knew they were meant to soothe. $2,200 a month, all inclusive. She smiled in the way people do when they believe they have solved you. Mr. Mercer unfolded his manila envelope and slid out a printout with a property tax map. "Your unit is prime," he said, then caught himself and softened. "What I mean is, you have value here. With the sale, you would have more than enough to cover any community you prefer." He gestured at a spreadsheet he had made. Columns, projections, a little graph shaped like a rising road. The lines were tidy. Tidy lines have talked many people out of themselves. I set my cup down and folded my hands. Who benefits, I asked, and let the question float like a ribbon between us. Everyone, Sloane said quickly, relief bright in her voice. You would have safety and company and less to worry about. Tyler and I would have a little breathing room while we pay down our wedding. And the apartment would not sit with a single person rattling around in it. She smiled with the firmness of a woman who believes she is doing the right thing and has practiced that belief in a mirror. On whose signature, I asked, looking not at the papers but at faces. There was a beat. The Mercers exchanged a glance that said, "Keep going, we rehearse this." Mrs. Mercer lifted her pen as if it might float to the answer. "Well, yours, of course," she said. "We only want to help you make the decision that makes sense." "Under which clause?" I asked, and turned a brochure on the table so the small print faced me. The concierge service page promised transitions with compassion. The bullet points were clean. Downsizing. Estate services. Powers of attorney consultation. It was as if a stranger had written a hymn to erasure and set it in a charming font. Tyler finally, Saturday. He looked older when he sat, like a boy who had grown too fast for his knees. "Mom," he said softly, "we worry. You say you are fine, but stairs, locks, deliveries. Sloane's building has a doorman. Her parents live close. It would be easier to check on you if you were somewhere with staff." He met my eyes for a second and dropped them. On the list of things he wanted from life, my comfort was written in a hand I recognized. My consent was written in someone else's. I stood and went to the desk. My ledger notebook lay open with yesterday's date. I wrote today's time and the words, "Care Plan Meeting." Then I returned to the sofa and lifted the manila envelope. The paper inside was a pre-filled intake sheet from a real estate office. My name spelled correctly. My address precise. Square footage typed in a neat font, the line for signature blank. I set it down as if it might stain the wood. "I want to be very clear," I said, and the room drew its shoulders up. "I am not moving. I am not selling. I do not consent to any inquiry, intake, or listing. I am safe in my home. I am sovereign in my decisions. I appreciate that you care enough to come to me together. But you have brought a plan that removes me from my own life and calls it compassion." Mrs. Mercer blinked and adjusted her necklace. "That is not fair," she said. "We are trying to help." "Help is a verb that holds the door while I carry my own things," I said. "It is not a hand that reaches into my pocket and takes my keys, because it is more efficient to drive than to walk." I picked up the intake sheet again. "Who filled this out?" Sloane's smile thinned. "It is just a template," she said. "We thought if we did the tiresome parts for you, you might see how simple it could be." "Simple for whom?" "For all of us," Tyler said, and his voice cracked on the last word. He rubbed his thumb over a scratch in the table. "Do not make me the villain, Mom. This is not about money." "Then why is there a spreadsheet on my coffee table and a form with my square footage filled in?" I asked, and leaned back against the sofa as if this were a normal afternoon where paper behaved itself. No one spoke for a long breath. The radiator ticked. A car door shut outside with a hollow thunk. Somewhere a neighbor laughed and then hushed themselves. Mrs. Mercer recovered first. "Marianne, you raised a good man. Let us make things easier for him as he begins his marriage. Think of how lovely it will be to have activities, friends your age, peace of mind." She said peace the way an ad says it, like it can be purchased in monthly installments. I stood and walked to the window. The river moved as it always does, toward something larger without asking permission. I turned back and said the thing that closed the topic. "I will not be signing anything you have brought today. I will not be discussing sale or transfer. If you believe I lack capacity to make that decision, you may consult whichever professionals you like, but you will not speak of my fate as if I am not in the room." Sloane's mouth hardened. Tyler's shoulders sagged. The Mercers gathered their papers with the reluctant efficiency of people packing up a picnic in the rain. At the door, Mrs. Mercer tried one more time. "We are all just thinking of what is appropriate for your age," she said. "Appropriate for my age is the view I wake to, and the stairs I know and the keys I earned," I said. "Appropriate for your age is staying in the part of my life that is yours, to influence, and leaving the rest untouched." They left with polite farewells and faces that promised new strategies. The tulips Tyler had brought sat on the counter like witnesses. I cleaned the cups. I wiped the table. I breathed until my hands were steady again. Then I called Nathan and described the meeting in the same tone I use when reading numbers out loud. He asked if I wanted to send a letter. Yes, I said. A letter that documents my refusal and denies any permission to act on my behalf or to inquire about my property. He drafted while I made a sandwich I did not finish. He read the letter to me over the phone, each line a clear pain. I approve, I said. Print it. An hour later, I walked to the post office with the envelope in my bag. The lobby smelled like dust and work. I filled out the green return receipt card in careful letters. I slid the envelope across the counter and asked for certified mail. The clerk stamped with a satisfying thud, affixed the barcode, and handed me the stub with the number that would track my decision through the system. Proof has a sound. It is small and final. Back home, I photographed the stub and the green card and placed the originals in the brown folder. I wrote the time beside the words letter sent. Then I set my pen down and listened to the click as I capped it. It sounded like a door choosing its frame. Headlights stitched the rain into threads. I checked the time again and let the number settle in my ribs. 28 minutes. Ruth arrived first, breath visible in the damp, her tote hugged tight to her side. She did not ask if I was sure. She handed me the brown folder the way a nurse hands a chart, knowing it holds both history and orders. I slid my fingers under the tab and felt the weight of paper that had waited years for this hour. Nathan pulled in behind her, parked clean, and joined us under the awning. He had his messenger bag, and that calm a person wears when they believe in procedures more than storms. He looked at my cheek and then left it alone. He looked at the folder and nodded once. We stood 3 across, a small line drawn under a sentence that needed closing. Inside the folder were the pages that explain a life to anyone who forgets how it was built. On top, a simple index in Nathan's square hand. Bonds, properties, transfers, guarantees, letters. I turned to the bonds first, a ladder of municipal notes that clicked out like rungs. Their dates and maturities rose in steady steps. When Robert was sick, we built that ladder so I would never have to sell in panic. He said it was a way to teach the future to arrive on schedule. I traced the dates and felt his palm in the room. The property section came next. The deed to a small neighborhood strip of storefronts that looks like nothing special unless you have watched the rent checks arrive on time for years. A bakery, a tailor, a print shop, a barber, 4 doors, all of them humming. Net income $42,000 per month, Nathan had written in the margin. He never used exclamation points. Numbers are loud enough alone when you respect them. Under that, a title to the lake cabin 2 hours west, a place with bad cell service and a good porch. We bought it a decade ago because the water reminded us to speak more softly. It had sat mostly empty since he died. Knowing it was there steadied me in winter. Knowing it was mine steadied me now. I turned to the section called transfers and the air thinned. Nathan had laid them out in columns that told a story I already knew and did not like to read. $148,500 sent across 34 months, regular and generous, each line an act I had called love. Rent support tallied and highlighted. Auto insurance. Credit cards that did not belong to my wallet. Then the guarantees. Tyler's lease, with my name in a box that bears more weight than a signature should. The event contract for Riverbend Hall, with my guarantee scribbled in a small hand by a manager who barely looked up from his terminal. Remaining balance at the hall $49,800, Nathan had noted. He placed a finger there and waited. I swallowed and nodded. The number did not shock me. It clarified me. Mercy is not blindness. Mercy has a ledger too. Ruth stood close enough to be warm without touching me. She said only this: we brought what is ours to bring. I closed my eyes and saw the room upstairs. The cake-like carved marble, the table where I had tied place cards with twine, the chair where Tyler sat when he checked his vows, the spot on the dance floor where my glasses had skidded to a stop, the silence that pretended to be polite, the silence that hid from courage. I opened my eyes and looked at Nathan. "What happens if we read?" I asked. "We will remain civil," he said. "We will speak only from the page. We will avoid adjectives. We will point to clauses. We will give clear notice." He tapped the next section. "I have prepared the suspension for the recurring transfers. It takes effect the moment you say the words." I have drafted a rescission for the lease guarantee, allowed under Clause 11.3. The event contract has a guarantee that can be revoked under Clause 7.2 upon notice. I have the language and the copies the venue will require. We will ask for the manager by name, Alvarez. We will read to him, and then we will rest our hands. I turned the rescission letter so the heading faced me. It was unadorned. The best letters are, I pictured handing it to a man in a jacket who knew how to nod and then call a cashier. I pictured the room hearing the word revoked as if it were a bell. Marianne, Nathan said, your voice will do this, not mine. I am here to carry the words if you need water. That is all. I breathed and nodded again. Ruth looked at me with the kind of pride that does not require agreement. She had placed a bandage and a small bottle of saline in her tote, as if my cheek needed tending, and the night did too. 22 minutes. Rain tapped a simple rhythm on the awning. A stretch limousine slid past and spilled 2 groomsmen and a girl in sequins who laughed until she saw me and then looked away. I did not blame her. You are young until the day you are asked to witness. Then you learn who you are. I turned one more section. Letters. A certified notice addressed to the Mercers and to Sloan that documented my refusal to sell or to appoint, already mailed and logged. A copy of the green return receipt card. A draft to my building manager clarifying that no one was authorized to inquire or to act on my behalf. A summary of phone calls and times. Dana's printouts neatly clipped with dates. It all sat there quiet and patient, a record waiting for its moment. Nathan handed me a slim fountain pen. It was the one I had used to sign my will after Robert died. He had brought it on purpose. I held it and did not yet uncap it. 19 minutes. I looked at the street and thought of the line between relief and regret. It is thinner than you expect and stronger than it looks. I had stood on one side of it for years, choosing to call my help a bridge. Tonight I would step across and call it a wall. A wall is not unkind. It keeps weather out. It keeps tender things safe. The vestibule door opened, and a woman in an apron leaned out to smoke under the eave. She squinted at us, and then seemed to recall me from an hour earlier. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "do you want me to get the manager?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Thank you." She nodded and drew on her cigarette like it was a kind of courage. I turned to Nathan. "Walk me through the hall contract again," I said. He slid the page to the top. Clause 7.2. The guarantee can be withdrawn by the guarantor with notice before final payment is due. Tonight is not final payment. There will be discomfort, but the clause holds. He tapped the margin. We will not be theatrical. We will be precise. When groups murmur, look at the text. When someone accuses, point to the date. People calm when paper does not blink. Ruth shifted her tote higher on her shoulder. She had her librarian face on, the one that stops a room without raising a voice. "If anything goes sideways, I will ask for quiet," she said. "I will say, please let the lady finish. I have shushed harder crowds than this." I smiled and wished I could hug her without smudging the moment. The clock in my head moved. 16 minutes. A breeze carried the smell of damp roses from the flower beds around the drive. The scent made me think of Robert's funeral and how the florist had tucked rosemary for remembrance into the wreath. Remembering is a kind of guardrail, too. It keeps you from making the same mistake twice and calling it love. Nathan offered me the folder to hold against my chest while he tucked his bag under his arm. His tie was slightly crooked. His shoes were sensible. I felt grateful for both. "I want to say this," I said, and I did not know I had the sentence until it arrived. "This is not retaliation. It is release. I am letting go of the scaffolding. If they fall, it will be because they stepped where I warned them not to. If they stand, it will be because they learned to find their own balance. Either way, I am finished being the thing they cling to, so they never learn the ground." He listened and did what he always does when I tell the truth out loud. He nodded once and tucked the sentence into his eyes where he keeps his client's best lines. 14 minutes. The door opened again and a burst of music spilled into the drive. The song cut and the sound of forks on china took its place. I could see through the glass the chandelier's reflection doubling itself on the floor. I could see the far wall where a photographer framed people into pretty squares. In one of those squares, Tyler stood beside Sloan, with his hand on the small of her back. She leaned into the flash without blinking. I watched her mouth form a word I could not hear, and guessed at keys. I put the pen in the folder pocket and closed the cover. The cardboard made a soft sound, the kind of sound a book makes when a chapter ends and the next must begin, whether the reader is ready or not. 13 minutes. Nathan squared his shoulders. Ruth tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and gave me a look I had last seen when she escorted a noisy group of teenagers out of a library without once raising her voice. I took one step toward the door and felt the marble remember my weight from earlier. I did not look at the mirror again. I did not need to see the handprint. I could feel the place it warmed and know it would cool. The doorman held the glass wide. The vestibule swallowed the rain and gave us lemon polish and soft carpet. We crossed it together. Inside the hall, the air was sweet with frosting and expensive wine. People turned. Their eyes were the same eyes that had watched someone slap me and turn themselves into furniture. I did not hate them. I had been furniture too in rooms where truth would have been inconvenient. Tonight I would be a voice. "Mr. Alvarez," I said to the nearest server. "Manager, please." She nodded and disappeared. Nathan slipped the rescission to the front. Ruth stood just behind my left shoulder. The band lifted their instruments and set them down again. The lighting changed from warm to neutral by a few degrees. It is a small thing, but it matters. Neutral light tells the room to see. I opened the folder and placed my right hand on the top page as if to swear. I would not swear, I would read. Then I would rest my hand. Then we would all learn what silence sounds like when it has to share a room with paper. Mr. Alvarez arrived with the look of a man who has seen every kind of party and knows when it is about to become something else. He stopped at a polite distance and folded his hands. "How may I help you, ma'am?" "Thank you," I said. "I am the guarantor on this event. I need the contract by number. Riverbend Hall, booking under Mercer Cole. Clause 7.2. He blinked once, surprised I knew the map of his paperwork. Then he nodded to a server who slipped away toward the office. Around us, the band let a chord fade into air. Conversations thinned to threads. At the head table, Sloane watched with the bright attention of someone who believes attention itself is control. Tyler's hand fell from the back of her chair. The server returned with a blue folder. Mr. Alvarez opened it and placed the pages on a cocktail table. He pulled an inch toward me. His finger found the clause. He read silently, then looked up. "Under Clause 7.2, he said, the guarantee may be withdrawn by the guarantor with notice before final payment. Is that your intention?" "It is," I said. "Effective immediately." A small current moved through the room, the kind that lifts the hair on your arms when a window opens. Mr. Alvarez nodded. "Then I will require written notice." I turned the brown folder toward him and slid the rescission onto the table. He read it, lips moving just enough to show respect for each word. He did not argue. He signed the copy for my records and tucked his into the blue folder. He straightened his tie, then addressed the space between us and the crowd without raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will need to secure alternate payment arrangements before the evening concludes. There is time. Please continue to enjoy yourselves while we coordinate with the hosts." "Enjoy yourselves" did not land in the room. It hovered and then fell. Sloane stood. She did not look at the manager. She looked at me. "What are you doing, Marianne?" Her voice had the brittle sugar of a spun dessert. "This is our wedding." I kept my eyes on the page and placed the next document on the table. "Mr. Alvarez, please also attach this to the contract file. It is a copy of certified letters sent earlier this week to the Mercers and to Ms. Mercer, noting my refusal to sell, appoint, or transfer any interest in my home." Sloane laughed once, a short sound. "No one is trying to steal from you," she said, as if I had accused her of picking a pocket. "We are trying to help you spend less time rattling around a big place you cannot maintain." I let the sentence pass like a bus I did not need to catch. I lifted the third page. This notice suspends all recurring transfers from my accounts to Tyler Cole and to vendors on his behalf. Effective immediately. I placed it in front of Nathan, who nodded and made a quiet note with his fountain pen. Tyler stepped forward. "Mom, please." His voice held panic and a shred of the boy who used to bring me scraped knees and math homework. "Can we talk privately for a second?" "We will. After we read," I said. "Nathan, the lease." He set the rescission for the apartment guarantee on the table. I spoke the phrase that moved it from paper to air. Under Clause 11.3, the guarantor may rescind. I am rescinding. Effective immediately. Notice will be delivered to the landlord at 9 tomorrow. "Mr. Alvarez, would you be willing to witness the time we said this aloud?" He nodded and glanced at his watch. 9:41 in the evening. Witnessed. Sloane's father began to move from his chair, the color in his face draining to a paler conviction. He had the look of a man who expected spreadsheets to keep the world polite. Mrs. Mercer reached for a water glass and knocked her knife instead. It rang once against the plate and settled. Across the room, a guest's phone rose, then another. I could see our faces reflected in small rectangles. Ruth stepped half a pace closer to me and turned slightly, her posture making a quiet half-wall with her body so the circle did not collapse into me. "Please let the lady finish," she said, not loud, perfectly shaped. I raised the next document, the transfers. For 34 months, I have sent regular support to my son and to vendors for his household. Those transfers stop tonight. If you believed I would continue to carry your plans on my quiet back, you were mistaken. I said it without heat, the way you read a total on a bill and accept that numbers are not negotiable. Tyler's face changed in a way I will not forget. He looked like a child who has touched a stove and learned the lesson fire never says twice. He began to speak and then shut his mouth so quickly his teeth clicked. I felt my own heart make a deep, slow sound and keep its pace. "There is one more item," I said. I slid the will amendment to the top. "I have updated my estate plan. The portion once intended for my only child will now be directed in large part to the Cole Dignity Fund, an elder justice initiative to be administered by council with Ruth's oversight. Some bequests remain for Tyler contingent upon counseling and restitution. The rest goes to work that bears our name without bruising our blood." A gasp moved the room like wind in a wheat field. Someone whispered, "She is serious," as if I had previously been a hobby. Sloane's knuckles whitened on the back of her chair. "That is vindictive," she said. "Family is not a court. Family is a record," I said. "It remembers who shows up to help and who shows up to harvest. It forgives where there is repentance. It removes access where there is repeated harm. Those are my terms." I did not look at her when I said it. I looked at Tyler. He took one step closer to me. His eyes shone. "Mom," he said, the syllable breaking. "Please, we can fix this." His hand lifted, then dropped. I had the fleeting ache to take that hand the way I would have when he was 6 and afraid of dogs. But I kept my own at my sides. There is a time to comfort and a time to let a man feel the ground under his choices. Mr. Alvarez cleared his throat softly. "For our purposes," he said to me and to the room, "is it correct that the guarantee is revoked and that payment will need to be made by other parties?" "Correct," I said. "Effective immediately." He inclined his head. "Then I will speak with the hosts. Ladies and gentlemen, there is still dessert. There is still coffee." He looked as if he wanted those to be enough to stitch the evening back together. They were not. Sloane found her voice again and sharpened it. "This is cruelty dressed as dignity. You wanted a spectacle, Marianne. Now you have one." I kept my posture steady and my tone flat. "No spectacle." A record read aloud. "You chose the audience when you struck me. I chose to bring the papers." A flicker of something that might have been doubt crossed her face, then left. She turned on a heel that cost a car payment and stalked toward the corridor, phone already in her hand. Tyler stood where he was and seemed unable to move. I gathered the copies Nathan had marked for me and slipped them back into the brown folder. I felt the cardboard against my palms and welcomed its plainness. Ruth handed me a handkerchief. I did not need it. But I held it because holding a friend's square of cloth is sometimes how you keep from feeling alone under chandeliers. "There will be questions," Nathan murmured near my shoulder. "We answer none that are not about the documents. We offer no adjectives. We let the paper do its work." I nodded. Then I looked at the closest row of guests. "Thank you for your courtesy," I said. "I am finished. Mr. Alvarez, if you need me to initial any copies, I will be by the far wall for a moment, and then I will go." I walked past the cake. It looked less like a promise now, and more like a sculpture of sugar pretending to be marble. A woman I did not know reached for my arm and then thought better. A man lowered his phone and lowered his eyes. I do not know if he was ashamed for me or for himself. I do not carry that answer. By the wall, Ruth stood with me and watched the band reshuffle their sheets. Tyler moved in our direction, then stopped and pressed his fingers to his eyes. Sloane's parents whispered to Mr. Alvarez in a fast hush that sounded a lot like mathematics. I breathed. My cheek throbbed less. The room no longer tilted. Nathan joined us and tapped the folder twice, the small ritual we had invented for, "The thing is done on our side." Before we left, I spoke once more, not to the room but to the air that would hold this night in memory. This is not punishment, it is boundaries. The difference is what allows love to become honest again someday, if it ever will. Then we turned toward the vestibule. The music tried to find itself. Forks met plates. Somewhere a child laughed at something small and was shushed. I carried the folder against my ribs and felt my heart beat beneath it, steady and undecorated. In the doorway, Mr. Alvarez caught my eye and gave a small nod. Paper had done what paper can. Now the rest belonged to the people who had mistook my silence for consent. I stepped into the lemon polish and the marble and then into the rain, which did not care about our clauses or our pride. It only cared about gravity, which is another word for truth. The rain let the night cool my face. By morning, the air had stiffened into something cleaner. I made coffee, washed my cup, and sat with the brown folder on the table like a guest who did not eat but would not leave. I thought the day might be quiet. Then the phone began. It started with a message from Tyler at 6:12. "Please call me." Then another at 6:15. "Please." Sloan at 6:29. "You will regret this." Her mother at 6:30. "This will reflect poorly on you in the community." I set the phone face down and let the messages collect like leaves against a door. I would sweep them later. At 8, Ruth knocked. She had a paper bag with 2 croissants and a small jar of marmalade. She set both on the counter and took the seat across from me. "We are going to separate what is urgent from what is loud," she said. "Eat something while the loud tries to dress as urgent." The first loud arrived at 9, delivered by the super in a sorry to bother you voice. He had a printout of an email sent to the building account. It was from a username that looked like a cousin of Sloane's. It warned of concerning behavior by a resident on our floor, an older woman who had caused a scene at a public event and now might not be safe to live alone. It requested wellness checks and asked whether management had a policy about capacity evaluations. The super's eyebrows said he did not believe a word of it. He still needed me to sign that I had received the note. I signed and wrote next to my name, "I am well. No checks requested." He nodded with relief and folded the paper away. Dana texted at 9:15. "Morning check. No listing on your address. I set an alert for any changes. Also, your building camera picked up last night's corridor at 9:03 when you left, and again at 10:11 when you returned. Time stamped and clear, useful if anyone says you wandered or forgot." I sent her a thank you and a heart. Hearts are good records, too. The next knock came from the delivery man with a letter sent by courier from a small firm Sloan had mentioned weeks ago. It was a lawyer's letter, thick with soft authority and heavy paper. It requested a conversation about guardianship options for a family concerned about a loved one's decision-making and referenced alleged financial impulsivity and public outbursts. The sentence "public outbursts" sat so calmly on the page, I might have believed I had screamed and danced on a table. I placed the letter in the folder under a tab Nathan had labeled "Other People's Narratives." Nathan arrived at 10 with a crisp stack and a thermos of tea. He read the lawyer's letter, traced the paragraph with one finger, and made a small sound like a man identifying a familiar bird. "Preliminary posture," he said. "It is not a petition. It is a balloon. We do not chase balloons. We prepare for the weather. We built weather." Nathan drafted a response that declined any conversation outside counsel and reminded the firm that truth is defamatory's natural enemy. He attached a cease and desist addressed to the cousin's email and to Sloane's parents regarding false statements about my competence. He prepared a motion skeleton to dismiss any future petition and to request fees if something frivolous arrived dressed as concern. He did all of it the way he makes soup, quietly, with a recipe, leaving the kitchen cleaner than he found it. At noon, Ruth persuaded me to call my doctor. Dr. Huerta has the eyes of a person who sees fear and walks toward it. She had 2 cancellations and told me to come by. At the clinic, the waiting room smelled like disinfectant and hope. She examined my cheek with the gentleness of a friend and the seriousness of a record keeper. She ordered photographs and a note for the file. We talked about sleep and stress. She ran a cognition screen I did not need but was happy to pass because sometimes the best rebuttal to an invented story is a score that does not blink. Numbers comfort me. The results were ordinary in the best way. Normal, stable, no deficits. She printed them and signed them while the ink was still brave. "This is not for them," she said. It is for you, so that when people lie about you, you have something heavier than air in your hands. Back home, the phone had grown a tail of missed calls. I set it to do not disturb and breathed. The silence lasted 6 minutes. Then another knock. This time it was Joseph from 3 floors down, a retired fireman with a voice like a well-tuned engine. He held his phone out with a video paused at the moment of my glasses on the ballroom floor. "Someone from table 6 posted this last night," he said. "It is all over the neighborhood group. Comments are not what the cousins hoped." He pressed play. The clip showed the room, the slap, the stillness, my walk to the door, and a tight shot of Sloane's mouth forming the words "hand over your keys." The caption read, "A mother-in-law got slapped for refusing to hand over her apartment keys. Team bride or team mom?" Under it, in a wave that made my throat warm, 100 comments. Team mom. Team boundaries. Team bring your papers. People told stories I recognized from other kitchens. My son did this. My daughter demanded that. I wish I had done what you did. I wish my mom had. I forwarded the video to Nathan and to Dana. I texted Ruth, who responded with a single word that made me laugh. Librarians. She meant witnesses. She meant record keepers. She meant let this be shelved where it belongs, under truth, not under rumor. The afternoon brought 2 phone calls from numbers I did not know. The first was from a reporter who wanted a quote. I declined and sent her to Nathan. The second was from a woman named Carmela, who lived 3 buildings over. She had been at the wedding as a +1 for a cousin. Her voice shook. "I did not speak up last night," she said. I froze. "I am sorry. If anyone tries to say you were confused or cruel, I will swear to what I saw. A woman who kept her voice. A girl who lost hers." I thanked her and wrote her name in my notebook under witnesses I did not ask for, but needed. By 3, the loud had become a pattern. Small attempts to redefine the night, new accounts made to recirculate the rumor I could not manage my affairs, a neighbor's cousin who knocked to suggest I consider companionship care. Each time Ruth answered the door with the grave courtesy of a librarian asking patrons to lower their voices. "We are fine here," she said. "We are reading." Dana sent another email. 2 more videos surfaced, different angles of the ballroom, one from the balcony, one from near the band. She had already downloaded them and saved them to a drive labeled Evidence. Nathan filed a preservation letter to the venue requesting that their security footage around the time of the payment notice be maintained. Mr. Alvarez replied within 20 minutes. "Consider it preserved," he wrote, professional in print, and in the gap between lines, a hint of admiration I felt as warmth. At 4, the doorbell rang with the energy of someone who does not imagine a boundary applies to them. Sloane's mother stood in the hall, jaw set, holding a bouquet like a flag she could plant in someone else's ground. She tried to step inside. Ruth moved into the doorway so soft it could not be called a block. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "please send any further communication through counsel. We are not discussing this at the door." Mrs. Mercer's eyes flashed. Then she looked at me, saw I would not say what she came to collect, and left without placing the flowers. That small refusal felt like the right-size victory. The last official piece of the day arrived in an email from a county court portal at 5:43. "Petition pending" appeared in the subject line like a storm warning. Nathan opened it and read aloud. They had filed a preliminary request for an evaluation, not a full guardianship, dressed carefully with words like concern and safety. They included affidavits from 3 guests who wrote about my alleged outburst. Nathan read the names and then looked up. 2 from Sloane's college circle, 1 from her uncle. He smiled without humor. Friendly affidavits do not become facts when you line them up in a row. He began to type. "We will move to dismiss. We will attach the videos. We will attach the clinic note. We will attach your camera timestamps. We will request fees. We will request that the court remind counsel of the difference between worry and weapon." I stood and stretched. The sky pressed its face to the windows, and the river turned slate. My cheek had softened from red to a tired pink. I touched the tender place and let my hand fall. I was not angry. I was awake. As evening settled, my phone vibrated with notifications that stacked like rain. A woman in Ohio wrote to say she had mailed her son a boundary of her own. A retired teacher in Florida sent me a scan of a letter she planned to read at Thanksgiving before anyone asked her to co-sign anything. A man somewhere near the lake cabin wrote that he had watched a mother get erased and had not stopped it, and that he would not make that mistake again. Ruth brewed chamomile, and we stood by the window while the city lit itself one square at a time. Nathan gathered the papers into neat piles and placed the most important on top for morning. Dana texted a last line before she turned off her computer. "No movement on listings. Camera is set. Sleep if you can." I could. Not because the fight was finished, but because the story had clicked into place. They would file, we would answer, they would try to make noise, we would bring signal. The law does not love you. It does not have to. It only needs to be awake in the right direction when you knock. Before bed, I walked the hall and checked the door camera, the green eye steady. I returned to the kitchen and placed the brown folder on the counter where I could see it if I woke. I turned out the lights. In the silent apartment, the refrigerator hummed, the pipes clicked, the river moved, and something inside me unclenched by a measure I could count. Tomorrow would be for court and counsel. Tonight belonged to a woman who remembered her own name in a room that had tried to rename her. Courtrooms have their own weather. The air is cooler, the light is honest, and words arrive in their Sunday clothes. I wore a navy dress with a collar that stayed put and carried the brown folder like a small, polite shield. Ruth sat to my left with a spiral notebook and the composure of a person who has quieted full auditoriums with a lifted palm. Nathan arranged our exhibits in a binder with tabs that made a rainbow only we could see. Across the aisle, Sloane sat between her parents, immaculate and unblinking. Tyler kept his head down and stared at his hands, as if they might offer him a map out of a forest he had walked into himself. The case on the docket was not guardianship, not yet. A preliminary petition for an evaluation, a request wrapped in concern. Their lawyer stood when the judge entered and spoke with a voice designed to sound like bedside manner turned into law. He used the words erratic and impulsive and public outburst. He gestured toward the row where I sat without pointing. He referenced my age as if it were a diagnosis. He asked the court to appoint an investigator so that familial worries could be answered in the clean light of a report. Nathan rose. He does not alter his voice in court. He talks the way he talks at my kitchen table, as if calm were a language available to anyone who bothers to practice. He began with the facts that do not blink. Exhibit A, the video from the ballroom showing a physical strike and a subsequent request for keys. Exhibit B, the venue contract clause and the rescission under 7.2. Exhibit C, clinic records from the morning after, including photographs of my cheek and a cognitive screen with scores that do not require adjectives. Exhibit D, timestamps from my door camera showing me leaving, returning, sleeping, living, with no wandering or confusion to prop up a story built on fog. He offered letters, receipts, and sworn statements from people who were not cousins. He ended without flourish. The petition, he said, converts discomfort into accusation. It mistakes a boundary for instability. We ask that it be dismissed and that fees be awarded for the trouble of chasing a rumor to its corners. The judge watched both tables without interruption. She had the kind of face that does not tell you much, and the kind of pen that makes small notes when something true lands. After both arguments, she called a pause and read. Pages turned. The room breathed. Far down the hall, a copier started and stopped. The judge looked up. "Ms. Cole," she said, and her use of that name steadied me. "The court has reviewed the submissions. The videos and documents are clear. There is no basis for an evaluation. The petition is dismissed. As for fees, the court is inclined to grant reasonable expenses associated with responding to a filing that appears retaliatory in nature. Counsel will confer and submit amounts with documentation." She went on, not to scold exactly, but to instruct. She spoke about risk factors for elder abuse and how concern can be rebranded as control when money is involved. She noted that attempts to recast lawful actions as confusion waste time the court could spend on people who truly need someone to speak for them. She looked at the other table and said the court expects better judgment from those advising young families who might be struggling financially. Her voice never rose. It did not have to. Truth carries without amplification when you let it walk on its own legs. Beside me, Ruth exhaled the way librarians do when a room remembers it is a library. Nathan made one neat note. Across the aisle, Sloane's jaw tightened. Tyler's shoulders caved another inch. The gavel touched wood with a sound more like a period than an exclamation point. The hallway afterward smelled like paper and bleach. Nathan stood close enough that I could hear him, but not so close that I had to be held. "We will circulate a proposed fee statement by end of week," he said. "We will also file for a protective order that limits third-party harassment and false statements while this cools." He did not say if, he said while. Sloane's counsel approached, flanked by the Mercers whose faces wore the expression of people who have confused money with expertise. He tried a different tone. "We do not want this to get uglier," he said. "Perhaps some assurances could be exchanged. Perhaps Ms. Cole would consider restoring certain supports as a gesture of good faith if public statements are toned down." Nathan did not step between us. He did not have to. He simply asked which supports and on what condition. The lawyer spoke in generalities. Nathan spoke in nouns. When it became clear the proposal was a request for me to resume paying for their choices in exchange for their silence about my sanity, he closed his folder and said, "We are not bartering dignity." Tyler stood a few feet behind them. He looked at me like a person looks at water he is not sure he deserves. "Mom," he said, very small. "I know." "Know what?" I asked, and kept my voice level. "That we did wrong. That I did. That I let it happen. That it felt easier to let someone else steer and then to call it caring." He blinked hard and looked down again. I waited. He did not say sorry. He did not offer repair. He only offered knowledge, which is not nothing, but is not enough. When you have built a problem on a foundation of "you know me," you must someday learn to build a repair on a foundation of "here is what I will do." We did not hug. I do not know if I wanted to. I think I wanted a time machine and a river walk and a boy with scraped knees asking how to find his way back from a wrong turn. Those do not live in hallways. They live in work you do once you go home. The weeks that followed had their own tempo. The court signed the dismissal and later the order on fees. The amount was not vast. It was precise. Enough to say your time counts too. Enough to remind counsel that concern as a costume has a rental fee they will not wish to pay twice. The venue and vendors called Sloane and her family to arrange payment for the wedding. Mr. Alvarez did not need to call me. He sent a courteous note to Nathan instead, acknowledging receipt of revocation and detailing the outstanding balance. 49,800 has a way of finding the right mailbox when polite guarantees are removed. The spreadsheet family learned that numbers do not become kinder when you glare at them. Tyler's employer saw the videos the way people do when the internet brings them to your desk. There was a conversation. He kept his job, but the promotion he had been chasing took a detour. I heard it in a roundabout way. A colleague who goes to my church spoke to a friend who mentioned an internal memo about reputational awareness. I took no pleasure. I did not rejoice in consequence. I noted it as a data point in a life that now belonged to gravity. Sloane tried to repair her image with posts about misunderstandings and the complexity of families. She changed her profile picture twice and then switched to private. Clients were less responsive to the brand of advice that could not prevent a ballroom from becoming a lesson. A woman who teaches presentation should know that how you treat people is the story no filter can fix. There were also offers. Nathan relayed an email from their counsel proposing a settlement in which we would all walk away if I would agree not to speak publicly, restore a small stipend for 6 months, and revisit my estate plan in a year. He asked if I wanted to consider it. I said I would consider an apology that names the harm, counseling that is documented, and restitution on a schedule that teaches, not crushes. I said I would consider speaking together one day to help other families if they did the work. I said I would not consider silence purchased with my own money. They did not reply to that. Silence is useful when you choose it. It is less impressive when it shows up because you have nothing decent to say. Dana sent me a note the day the fee order arrived. A simple line. "You breathed for all of us who have watched a mother get edited out of her own story." I printed it and slid it behind the tab labeled "Letters That Help." Ruth and I took a slow walk by the river and let the wind tell us we were still here. She asked if I wanted to go to the bakery in the strip I own. We stood in line with 2 teenagers and a man in a paint-flecked cap. No one knew me there. No one needed to. The register beeped. The bell over the door rang. The smell of bread did what it always does to a human heart. It reminded me that some wealth is yeast. It rises quietly and feeds a whole street. At night I slept. Not perfectly. Grief has its work even when victory is clean. Some dreams took me back to marble floors and made me choose again not to shout. Other dreams gave me the sound of a lock turning in a door I will never surrender without reading the paperwork twice. When I woke on the morning after the fee order, the brown folder sat thinner by a handful of pages. Nathan had filed what needed filing. The rest would wait. I made coffee. I watched the light crawl down the wall. I thanked the day for its plainness. If you asked me what justice sounds like, I would tell you that day taught me it is not the gavel or the gasp. It is the rustle of copies being made and the tap of a pen when a judge writes in a margin. It is the satisfied hiss of an envelope sealing and the small click of a lock that stays in your own pocket. It is the word dismissed spoken without triumph and the words fees awarded spoken without spite. It is the quiet of walking out of a courthouse with your name still yours and your steps still choosing their own direction. 6 months after the marble, the lemon polish, and the word revoked, I sat beneath studio lights that did not pretend to be kind. They were honest lights. They warmed my forehead and left the rest of me alone. A production assistant clipped a small microphone at my collar. Claire Benton, host of American Lives, leaned forward from her chair and spoke in a voice that felt like a porch. "We are grateful you are here, Ms. Cole. Tell us what you wish someone had told you before the party and the papers." I looked past the cameras to where Ruth and Nathan sat in the dark row set aside for guests. Ruth's notebook was open to a clean page. Nathan's hands were folded on his knee like a quiet ledger. I breathed once. Then I answered the way I had promised myself I would. Slowly, without adjectives, with enough detail that someone at home could hear her own floorboards in my words. I told the room that pressure arrives soft, that it wears perfume and carries a casserole. That it speaks the language of concern, and that it asks for your keys with a voice that has already practiced the sentence enough to make it sound like love. I said, keep a notebook. Write dates and times. Do not wait to decide if it is serious. The page will tell you later. We played the portion of the ballroom video that mattered, and then we did not play it again. Claire asked about guardianship petitions and the way a rumor tries to become a robe the court must recognize. Nathan kept his sentences short and left the law where it belongs, on the table, not in the throat. He explained springing authority. He explained why concern can be a mask for control when money is near. He named the filings as if they were tools in a drawer you can learn to use without hurting yourself. Claire asked why I had kept my wealth quiet. I answered as plainly as I could. Because I wanted love to find its footing without a cushion. Because visible money attracts other people's plans. Because privacy is a door that lets you decide who knocks. Her face softened. She moved to the question that had waited to be asked since the first light was set. What do you say to a woman at home who hears her family calling her stubborn, selfish, or confused because she wants to stay in the place she knows? I said the sentence that had formed in me the night of the rain. Help is the hand that holds the door while you carry your own things. It is not the hand that reaches into your pocket for your keys. If they are holding the wrong hand, step back until the right one offers itself. After the interview, the studio let out a breath the way kitchens do when the last pan is hung. A producer cried a little. A cameraman squeezed my shoulder. In the green room, Ruth tore off a strip of granola bar and insisted I eat it. Nathan took off his tie and folded it like an apology to his own neck. We rode the elevator down together and the city air felt new, as if the lights had washed it. The next week stretched long and then clicked into a shape I recognized. The fee order posted. Their petition faded into a file it deserved. A check arrived with the court stamp, and a number that did not change a life but could change a day for many people if we let it. I took it to the bank with Ruth and Nathan, and we deposited it under the name we had chosen for the work that now had a home, Cole Dignity Trust. The teller asked if we were excited. Ruth said we were determined, which is another kind of excited. We rented 2 rooms over the print shop in my strip. The landlord gave me a friendly deal and laughed when I reminded him I was the landlord. We kept the paint simple and the furniture plain. The first sign on the glass said free clinic hours on Thursdays for elder questions. Bring your papers, bring your stories, bring a friend. Nathan set up a short intake form that asked only what was needed. Ruth arranged shelves for brochures from legal aid and social workers we trusted. Dana donated a table and 2 chairs. We sat with 10 people the first week, 30 the next. Word does what it wants when it recognizes itself. There were stories, each with its own ache and its own math. A widow with a son who wanted to move her to a town he could afford. An aunt whose niece had already staged 3 interventions that were really rehearsals for emptying a house. A retired teacher who had co-signed a loan for a grandson and now needed to learn how to uncouple without becoming a villain. We read their papers. We wrote letters. We taught the phrases that keep a door on its hinges. I do not consent. I will not be signing. Please communicate with counsel. The fee award from the court paid for more than printer ink and tea. That money planted a small garden at the county hospital. Not flowers, a travel fund. When Robert was sick, the hardest part of love was the miles, bus tickets, gas, a place to sleep for a night near a bedside. We took the check that had arrived because someone tried to call me confused and turned it into a line of small envelopes for caregivers who needed to show up without losing a day's wages. The hospital let us name it. The Robert Cole Travel Stipend. A plaque went on the wall with letters that were not fancy. Ruth cried when she saw it. I touched the metal and felt the cool say his name back to me without sorrow. People wrote to the trust with stories that fit in 2 sentences and then spilled over the edges. A grandmother in Arizona who had moved out on a Thursday and slept on a friend's couch for a week to keep her house from becoming a bank for a startup. A nurse in Michigan who had almost signed a power of attorney because her nephew told her it would make emergencies easier and who now wanted to bring him to clinic hours to hear about contingencies and limits. We answered every message. Sometimes we answered with a phone number and a prayer. Sometimes we answered with a letter that had teeth and the calm of a librarian's shush. Tyler did not come by the clinic. He sent 3 emails over 2 seasons. The first asked if I would consider a conversation. The second asked for help with a bill that had come due. The third said Sloan had taken an apartment across town and that he needed to find a way to see their baby, who would arrive in late spring. I read them all and answered only the first. I wrote, I am willing to talk when you are ready to name the harm and your part in it and to say what you will do to repair it. He did not write back. Repair is harder than need. It asks for change before it asks for help. When the baby came, a mutual friend told me his name. I wrote it on a small card and put it in the drawer with the lockbox keys. I asked Nathan to set up a college account that would belong to the child when he is grown, no matter what any of us manage or fail between now and then. This is not a bribe for anyone to love me. It is a reminder to myself that love can work without contact. Claire invited me back to American Lives for a follow-up a year after the first interview. This time I brought a stack of small cards we had printed with sentences people could put on their refrigerators. You can say no kindly. You can ask which clause. You can change your mind. You can be generous without becoming a line item. We taped the show in an afternoon. In the hallway afterward, a woman in a janitor's uniform stopped me and said my mother needed this. She pressed her palm to my cheek very gently in the place that had once held a print, and then took her hand away as if she had not touched me at all. Sometimes on Sundays I drive out to the lake cabin. The porch remembers us. The water carries every kind of light. I sit with a thermos and the quiet company of a man I loved who taught me to put money to work where it will not be seen. I talk to him out loud some days because names like his deserve air. I tell him about the trust and about Ruth and Nathan and Dana and about the way a courthouse can sound when a judge writes 2 words with a pen. Dismissed. Fees. On the way back to the city, I stop at the bakery in my strip and buy bread. I do not need so that I can hand a loaf to the man in the paint-flecked cap and call him by name. He calls me by mine. It is a small currency. It spends well. At home, the river still throws silver at the ceiling, and the bridges keep their slow, proud shapes. The apartment has not grown larger or smaller. It has grown truer. On the inside of my door, next to the hook where my scarf hangs, there is a photo of the clinic plaque. Under it, a small card with the question I ask everyone who comes to our table and wonders if it is too late to take their life back. Tell me your city, it says, and one ritual that keeps your home steady. Sometimes at night, a tremor of the old hurt visits and asks to be named. I turn the deadbolt and hear the sound that soothed me the first night I came back from the ballroom with a folder against my ribs. It is not a gavel. It is not applause. It is the soft click of a lock in a door that belongs to me. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.